On the 28th of October 2015, at the peak of the long summer of migration, during which 1 million refugees crossed the Aegean Sea, a ship carrying over 300 refugees from Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Lebanon and Kurdistan sank between the western coast of Turkey and the Greek island of Lesvos. The shipwreck resulted in the death of at least 43 people. More people went missing, the fate of whom is still unknown. One of the passengers on this ship was a Syrian woman called Amel Alzakout, traveling with her friend. Amel documented her route using a wrist-mounted waterproof camera. Her footage captured the crossing from the unique perspective of those drowning at the maritime borders of the European Union. Now based in Berlin, Amel asked forensic architecture to help reconstruct the incident and its aftermath. Together, we tried to understand how such a deadly shipwreck could occur in a narrow strip of water so densely populated and heavily monitored by EU agencies. We looked at the actions of those involved: smugglers, national coast guards, the European border agency Frontex, as well as civilian rescuers such as local fishermen and activists. Our analysis shows that this tragedy is the result of government policies that intend to police and repel migrants rather than setting out to assure their safety. Because her camera occasionally switched off, Amel's footage includes a sequence of 21 clips with time gaps in between. The time encoded in the camera's metadata was incorrect. As a result, we could only sequence her videos and establish their relative times. By sampling a vertical strip of pixels from every frame, we reconstructed a visual diagram of each clip. The color reveals all the moments that Amel's hand was underwater. In one of Amel's clips, we see the smugglers abandoning the vessel. The smugglers promised that, for the fee of $2,500 per person, the crossing would be undertaken in groups of 50, traveling aboard a large boat. Instead, they packed an old wooden boat with more than 300 people and sent it out in rough weather. The smugglers embarked on a boat called Captain Edermit that took them back to Turkish shores. Meanwhile, they forced one of the passengers who had no previous experience at sea to steer the migrants' boat towards the Greek shore. As the wind gradually grew stronger, the boat started swinging heavily and the waves reached the lower deck. Passengers started throwing bags overboard to lighten the load. Amel told us that one of the passengers jumped into the water without a life jacket or a flotation device. The swinging of the boat grew stronger until the front poles broke and the top deck crashed onto the hold below. The boat then turned on its left side and collapsed. Critically, the time the ship sank was captured by a smartphone belonging to Amel and her friend, which was protected in a waterproof case and captured the time and the precise GPS location of the shipwreck through a location-sharing app. They were transmitting their trajectory to a group of friends who were monitoring their safety. The phone's GPS registered the sudden drop in speed at the time of the shipwreck. A change in trajectory indicates that after the vessel sank, the group drifted for 9 more minutes before water entered the case and the phone stopped recording. The time of the shipwreck is 3 p.m. and 45 seconds in Eastern European time. This allowed us to precisely calibrate Amel's footage. The moment of the shipwreck also marks the moment when the rescue operation begins. Although the GPS app originally showed the shipwreck to have occurred in Turkish waters, it does so because it uses a simplified map. When superimposing the more detailed maritime borders we obtained from the Hellenic Navy Hydrographic Service, the GPS shows that the shipwreck occurred at the very threshold of Europe, 280 meters within Greek territorial waters. The shipwreck, having occurred within the territory of the EU, makes EU agencies responsible for search and rescue. To reconstruct the rescue operation, we cross-reference the Amel's footage with other audiovisual sources from rescuers, journalists and activists. A brief clip from the Frontex vessel Peter Henry von Koss was posted on Twitter the day after the event. 3 more photographs were posted on the official Facebook page of the Norwegian Coast Guard. Clips from the helmet-mounted GoPro camera of a Greek Coast Guard crew member on vessel P Lambda Sigma 144 were uploaded to YouTube. These provide a close-up of the rescue operation. Our request to the Coast Guard for more footage was denied. Artist Richard Moss, accompanied by Trevor Tweeten, were present on the Greek shores capturing the incident on a military-grade thermal camera. This camera is crucial because it does not rely solely on the visual spectrum, but also registers heat values, revealing human bodies that are warmer than the surrounding water. A slightly different angle from the Greek shore is provided by 2 recordings from activist Eric Kempson. Further footage was shot by an Associated Press videographer, Mikel Konate, who was also filming from the shore before he boarded one of the Greek Coast Guard vessels and continued filming from there. Finally, 2 photographs posted to the Facebook account of Nabajo Kayaker show the boat immediately before and after it capsized. The AP journalist Mikel Konate's footage had accurate metadata, allowing us to place it on the timeline. We used visual cues to synchronize it to the thermal footage, like this moment when 2 Greek Coast Guard vessels crossed paths. We also obtained Automatic Identification System, or AIS data, for vessels in the area at the time of the shipwreck. In this data, we identified fishing boats that assisted in the rescue. Their formation demonstrates that after the phone stopped recording, the survivors continued to drift southwest. This is corroborated by weather data that recorded northwesterly winds on that day. At 4:13 p.m., a Turkish tanker called Alev Kaman, whose position is recorded by AIS data, was seen in the thermal footage. Aligning the AIS data with the simulation of the thermal camera allowed us to locate the scene. Behind the tanker is the Peter Henry von Koss, a Norwegian Frontex vessel that came to assist the rescue operation. Frontex was operating under Joint Operation Poseidon Sea, with the aim to control irregular migration flows towards the territory of the member states of the EU and to tackle cross-border crime. Despite the EU being responsible for rescue in these seas, none of the vessels operated by its agencies in the region had the capacity to effectively perform rescue in the conditions of the Aegean. This incompetency was structural and proved devastating to the rescue operation that day. The Peter Henry von Koss was the first to arrive at the site of the shipwreck. At 3:36 p.m., we see the vessel pass a group of survivors. The thermal camera footage shows groups of people in the waves. We interviewed Richard Moss and Trevor Tweeten, who were filming from the Lesvos shore.
Yeah, we started scanning on the horizon and in the water, and eventually we found the wreck, which was in progress at that point. I think when we first started, everyone was still pretty grouped together. You could see a lot of bodies in the water. Not much of the wreck was actually visible at that point. As we started scanning around, you could start to see different groups. They started to spread out as well. So you'd have these sort of different huddles of bodies out in the water. And it wasn't too long after that that other boats started arriving.
The Frontex boat was first on scene, I believe. It wasn't having much luck getting people out, not really equipped to do that.
At 3:42, the Peter Henry von Koss deployed its rigid hull inflatable boat, or RIB, in order to retrieve people from the water. Amel told us that at this point, people were holding on to pieces of the wrecked boat. Some were standing on the pieces until they completely sank. Moments before, volunteer Eric Kempson, filming from the Lesvos coast, captured the arrival of the Greek Coast Guard. Like the Frontex boat, the Lambro Panther 57 Mk2, described as an ultra-fast patrol boat and interceptor, was also only equipped for policing the border, not for rescue. Seconds later, his footage also captured the members of the Catalan lifeguard NGO Proactiva.
And then we have the Spanish lifeguards here. Fair play to them, they're both going out here together on jet skis. And they're heading out towards Frontex now. Frontex, as you can see on the back end, he's picking people up, but there's still a lot of life jackets floating around out there.
In the minutes that follow, the jet skis from Proactiva and the Greek Coast Guard converge on the Shipwreck and the Frontex vessel. By 4:22, 1 hour and 12 minutes after the time of the shipwreck, we can confirm the presence of two Greek Coast Guard ships, numbered P Lambda Sigma 144 and 150, the two Proactiva jet skis, the Frontex vessel, and one civilian fishing vessel, which was later joined by at least 9 others. In the clip from the Peter Henry von Koss, we see the Proactiva crews on jet skis. Unlike the vessels operated by the EU and Greece, Proactiva is the only actor at the scene equipped for rescuing people. We can see the crew of the Greek Coast Guard trying to pull survivors on board, but the high hulls of their boat make rescue difficult. This is confirmed by Oscar Camps, director of Proactiva.
Nos costaba mucho subir a las personas. La Guardia Costera no podía hacer nada, estaban sobrepasados. Yo recuerdo que solo estaban con un cabito y intentando que la gente se cogiera un cabo, pero no los podían subir, no se tiraban al agua, ni siquiera lanzaron las balsas salvavidas que hay en cada patrullera. Podían haber salvado mucha gente tirando y nadie tiró ni una balsa al mar, nadie.
The large and solid hulls also posed a significant impact risk to survivors in the water, making the necessary maneuvers to position the vessel in turbulent waters dangerous. Proactiva's crews and vessels, on the other hand, were able to maneuver easily in the crowded waters. Amel explained that the volunteers on jet skis were the first ones to reach them. She said, "They were moving fast, picking up children from their parents' hands and bringing them to safety. They were around us all the time, going back and forth. It gave us hope to see them rescuing." Footage from the Greek Coast Guard confirms how the jet skis were needed to ferry survivors to the larger vessels.
Los barcos de Frontex y de la Guardia Costera nunca han tenido el encargo, la orden del salvamento, nunca, porque no están pensados, ni su barco ni su tripulación están ni formados ni están pensados para el salvamento. Al contrario, están pensados para repeler una intrusión.
Although the Frontex boat is qualified as a search and rescue vessel, it is usually stationed in Norway, and as such, it is built for high seas. Its exposed propeller makes it a significant risk in such a dense and delicate rescue operation. Its hull is also too high to safely pull people out of the water. Amel told us that even though they saw the Norwegian boat shortly after they fell into the water, it took a very long time for the boat to reach them. She said, "The boat was very close to us, but standing still. We didn't understand why they were not helping us. They weren't doing anything except making us feel more furious and helpless." The crew seemed unable to cope with such challenging circumstances.
No se mojaban, solo alargaban un brazo, nadie fue al agua a subir a niños, no se nos ayudó nadie. Fue muy policial su actuación. Estoy seguro de que ninguno de los griegos tenía ninguna formación en primeros auxilios, cero formación en primeros auxilios.
Footage from the Greek Coast Guard confirms that the Proactiva rescuers had to go on board the Coast Guard vessel to perform basic CPR. We were later told by one of the Greek captains operating that day that the Coast Guard staff had received CPR training from volunteers, but not as part of the official government training. Contrary to the officials responsible for the search and rescue operation, Greek and Turkish fishermen who volunteered at the scene were much more successful in pulling survivors out of the water. We can identify 10 fishing vessels, among which are the Javus, the Fethi Kardesler, Agia Irini Chrysovalandou, Kapetan Georgis and Panayotis.
Los pescadores son los auténticos profesionales y bueno, iban recogiendo muy rápido a las personas, entonces pudimos rescatar a muchas del salvamento. Si no hubieran estado los pescadores, allí hubieran muerto 150 personas más.
At 4:40, a Greek military helicopter arrived. While trying to provide a visual overview of the situation to better coordinate the rescue, the helicopter ended up making it significantly more difficult, causing strong waves and drowning the sound of migrants whistling for help in the water.
El helicóptero seguía en estacionaria en el mismo sitio y solo sé que estaba grabando, como mucho estaba grabando vídeo. Pero no hizo nada, molestar, porque el aire del vuelo en estacionario hacía que el agua saltara por todas partes.
Amel described to us how the helicopter made their situation even worse, causing very high waves. She said that it was whirling above their heads for a long time and that she could see a camera from inside the helicopter filming them all the time. Our requests to obtain any additional footage from the helicopter have so far been rejected. During all this time, Amel's group and many others remained unassisted, even with numerous vessels present at the scene. In the water, there were many elderly and physically disabled people, as well as families with children. Amel was in a group of 5 who were holding on to a rubber ring, waiting to be rescued. As time passed, she observed people getting tired, some of them even letting go and drifting. Amel told us that she was very close to giving up as well. It was horrific to see people slowly disappearing from our surroundings.
Aunque mandes 5 barcos, si sacas 5 barcos más, seguro que no hubiera muerto tanta gente. Los chalecos de los niños nunca son de su medida y nunca los llevan bien atados porque no tenían cinchas para pasarlas por entre las piernas. Entonces cuando se mueren quedan inertes y salen del chaleco. Queda el chaleco solo. Y había muchos chalecos solos. Muchos chalecos solos.
The EU's long-term policy of repelling migrants left the local Coast Guard and Frontex crews underprepared and under-equipped for rescue, leading to this tragic loss of life only 3 kilometers from European shores. The fact that local actors made their best efforts to rescue makes these structural incompetencies on the level of EU states harder to identify. So far, no one has been held accountable for migrant deaths in the Aegean Sea. Amel was rescued at 5:30 p.m., over 2 hours after the boat collapsed. Later that night, Frontex claimed to have rescued 120 people, taking credit for an operation that they had greatly mishandled and erasing the contribution of volunteers, who were the only competent rescuers on the scene. In line with their policy to repel migrants, the EU has sought to remove search and rescue NGOs from operating along European coasts. They do so by criminalizing the rescuers. Proactiva was tried for assisted smuggling, and despite being acquitted, the Italian authorities still limited its operations in the central Mediterranean. Rescue efforts continued deep into the night. They were mostly undertaken by Greek and Turkish fishermen who brought the survivors to Lesvos harbour. A Romanian Frontex helicopter also joined. On shore, groups of volunteers provided medical aid to the survivors and tried to bring people back to life.
It was like a scene from hell. It was an absolute nightmare. You had like all the Red Cross workers, the volunteer doctors, the nurses, whoever was there, they laid out thermal blankets on the pier, outside. And then as the bodies came in, they would just try to get these hypothermic people back to life, literally rubbing their hands on the bodies to try to transfer that warmth into them. You had children being picked up by their heels and smacked on their back to try to get the water out of the lungs. And it was really horrific.
Bodies continued to wash up on the northern shores of Lesvos for several days. A few days before the shipwreck, the European and Turkish authorities published a joint action plan to harden control of Europe's eastern borders. The prospect of a closed border could explain why the smugglers overpacked the old wooden boat and sent it out into rough seas. In March 2016, 4.5 months after the shipwreck, this plan came into effect in the EU-Turkey deal. Since then, Aegean waters have been further militarized, with dramatic increases in surveillance and interception. EU agencies continue to treat those still attempting to cross as intruders rather than as civilians seeking safe ground. As part of this general policy of closure, refugees and migrants are being actively and violently deported and detained all along the borders of Europe. Some are left to die at sea.